Welcome to another episode of Hiss and Tell. Today I am joined by Dr. Elinor Karlsson. She is the chief scientist at Darwin's Ark, and we're going to talk about what modern genetics can teach us about cats, from fetching and affection to health, environment, and long-standing feline myths. Join us as we explore why cats are such a powerful and understudied genetic model and how everyday cat guardians are helping drive real scientific discovery. Make sure to check out our show notes for links and a special discount code you can use at Darwin's Ark.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hiss and Tell. I am your host, Christina Wilson, and with me today is Elinor Karlsson, a professor at UMass Chan Medical School and the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, and the chief scientist at Darwin's Ark. Welcome, Elinor.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for being here. To start, can you tell us a little bit about who you are? What do you do? What is Darwin's Ark? All of that stuff.
Yes, so I am what we call a computational biologist, meaning that I study very large data sets to try and understand, in my case, how DNA works, how this very, very long string of A's, C's, G's, and T's that every animal is carrying around inside its cells, actually everything living is carrying inside its cells, actually ends up encoding things like behavior. Like how is it that, a dog that is you've got dogs that are completely into retrieving things. Why? How do you
Right.
change DNA in order to make that happen? And so rather than most people in my field who like to study humans, I decided that it would be much more interesting to study things that are not humans. And so when I was a PhD student, I got involved in the Dog Genome Project and, got involved in all these mapping coat color traits and things like that, finding the gene for white coat color, for, you know, furlessness and things like that in dogs. And for many years, everybody thought that I was doing this because I was like really into dogs.
Uh-huh.
When the truth was that I had to get the giant breed encyclopedia in order to even know what a pug was. Like I got into it because they're a great genetic model. And I sort of told people, that my dirty secret is that I haven't actually ever owned a dog and I'm actually a complete cat person. And so I studied dogs, but I was like really into my cats. And so more recently, I finally had the opportunity to start our cat project, and I'm really excited about it.
That's exciting. So can you tell all of our listeners exactly what Darwin's Ark is?
So, Darwin's Ark is a nonprofit, a community science project where we ask people to sign up their pets. Originally, it was just dogs, and now we're enrolling everybody's cats as well. We ask you a lot of survey questions about your cats. We try to make it easy and fun, but we ask lots of things about your cat's behavior and their health and what they look like. And then for people who are able to donate to support the DNA sequencing, we can send out a kit to get a fur sample and actually sequence your cat's DNA. And the reason the project is designed like that is that people often think that the hard part about doing something like genetics is the fancy DNA genetics part. And it turns
Right.
out that's actually much easier than getting the information that you need to connect that DNA back to changes in the animal. Like we actually need to know, referencing my previous example, which dogs retrieve and which ones don't. And that can be really hard information to collect, except if they're pets, because it turns out that pets live with people and those people actually can tell us these things. So
Right.
it's pretty exciting.
That's cool. I would be so interested to look at cats who retrieve.
This was one of these things that's actually been surprising us a little bit. We have that question in our surveys, whether your cat retrieves
Cool.
or not. I've personally never had a cat that retrieved, and so I thought it was going to be a relatively rare trait. And it turns out that a lot of people are reporting that their cats retrieve. I can't remember the exact percentage right now, but I could find out. And that's actually particularly interesting to us in terms of behavior because behaviors in dogs like retrieving and herding and livestock guarding and all those sort of working dog behaviors turn out to have a stronger genetic basis than things like personality. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a good chance that that will actually be true in cats as well, in which case we might actually have a good chance of getting enough data to be able to explore the genetics of something like retrieving in cats.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm so interested. I've always noticed in at least just in our cats. We have 18 cats in our house right now. I
Wow.
know, I know. Thankfully we have a pretty big space, but 14 are ours, and then I'm, like, the only person in our town who does rescue, so whenever there's, like, a pregnant mom or whatever, I get the call, and they wind up here until they're old enough, and then we can place them. But I've always found the fetchers to be, like, tuxedo or piebald cats. I don't
Yeah, no,
know
it's
if that, like, is true across the board or that's just something that for some reason has, like, selected into the cats that I've had.
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. And, it actually ties into another part of the project. So people will often ask us, like, you know, can I actually participate without being able to donate any money right now?
Right.
And is it useful to you? And the answer is yes, because the survey data on its own is incredibly helpful. We don't have to have the genetic information to start answering questions. And to your point, if we have a whole lot of people that have told us what color their cat is and also
Mhm.
told us whether their cats play fetch or not, we can start asking questions like, is there a difference in pigmentation between cats that
Right.
fetch and cats that don't? And that way we can sort of immediately go from, hey, it's sort of something that I've observed with the cats I know, but that's, relatively small number of cats compared to
Yeah.
all the cats out there, to being able to actually ask the question for thousands and thousands of cats and figuring out if there's any truth to it or not.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I'm so excited about this whole project. Okay.
Yeah, no, as somebody whose first two cats were both orange and white, I'm
Mm.
very interested in dispelling all of the
The orange
misconceptions
cat
out
myth.
there around the orange cat things. So, I mean, I will go into it as a scientist, and that means that our null hypothesis has to be that there's no difference, and then we'll see if we can see a difference, and we will
Right.
test that. But it's interesting how much human brains are very good at attaching other things to characteristics like appearance. And so
Yes.
there's always lots of stories out there, and I'm sort of collecting them in my head so that we have an idea of which things we should start looking at.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I can't tell you how many I get journalists coming to me all the time from like, little websites that talk about cats and whatever. And so many of them, especially last year when there was all of this like social media, I think about like, oh, orange cats are dumb, were coming to me asking me like, what do you think about orange cat behavior? And I was just like, oh, you don't want to.
Not this again.
Yeah, exactly, like, it's not a thing, it's just people have made an association. People made the association
Yeah.
between this, and now they notice it, but it's not real.
Yeah,
Whatever.
no, and
Yes.
actually, so on the dog side of things, a few years ago, we had a paper we published that got a lot of attention because we basically looked at what we call the breed stereotypes, the
Mm,
idea that breeds have distinct personalities and temperaments and things like that. And with a few exceptions where we could see a little bit of difference, for the most part, we couldn't find big differences in personality or temperament between the breeds.
yeah.
And one of the things that was interesting to me is that the reason that you can't find it is that there's so much variation in personality within a breed that the differences between breeds are really subtle in comparison. Everybody's like, how could this possibly be true? But then if you talk to anybody who's had like 5 dogs in the same breed, and you're like, "Well, were all your dogs the same?"
Yeah.
And they're like, "No, this one loved people, and this one was really like to be stay by themselves, and this one," and it's like that's sort of what we're saying is that these animals are not things that fit into boxes, that they're
Yeah.
actually really complex personalities that have their own opinions about the world, and it's not as simple as looking at them and thinking that you know everything about them.
Ab absolutely.
Luckily, with cats, there tend to be fewer preconceptions because there isn't quite as much of a breed emphasis. I had an interesting experience recently. We did an event at the MIT Museum with the behavior expert in my group, a scientist named Catherine Lord, and we were doing like an ask me anything sort of thing. People could come and ask their questions.
Mhm.
And what struck me is that when people came and asked about their dog behavior, they would come up to us and they would say, my Cavalier King Charles Spaniel does X. But if people come and ask you a question about their cats, they generally just say, my cat does X. It's like we're
Yes.
starting from like less of inbuilt assumptions, which is going to
Right.
be an interesting, it might be actually quite fun to see how that plays out as our research goes on.
That's a very good point. I'm like, most people just have a cat, right? Most people do not have, oh, well, I have a Sphinx, or most people don't have a super specific breed of cat either. So
Yeah.
I think already you've kind of eliminated that from people don't come to having a cat most people. Like, most clients that I have aren't like, "Well, my cat's this." They're just like, It's a cat. I don't know."
Yeah.
They're
Don't
not
know
even
what
gonna
it.
s yeah, they're not gonna even say it's DSH versus, a long hair versus whatever. They're not coming at you. Whereas dog people, like you noted, are very much like, "Well, my dog is this."
Right, and they have these although surprisingly, they're actually pretty good about answering, like, we couldn't see a big what we call a breed bias in the surveys, so I still think that most people are actually really good at observing the animal that they live with as an individual. They
Right.
sort of just don't do it on a breed level.
That's fair. That's fair. So that kind of brings me into my next question, which is that, like, one of the things that you said was that even though we've lived with cats for thousands of years, we know very little about their genetics and their behavior compared to dogs or even ourselves. Can you talk a little bit about that gap and, like, what it means in terms of your research and everything that you're doing?
Yeah, so with dogs, it's a little bit of a there's a little bit of science and there's a little bit of probably like cultural stuff. I can speak to the science sort of part of it, which is that early in the days of genetics and genomics, it was much because it was very hard to actually read off the sequence of the DNA, the A, C's, G's, and T's. That was like really expensive when we started.
Mhm.
And so in dogs, because we had all these breeds where the dogs within the breed were very, very related to each other, there wasn't a lot of genetic diversity. You could actually do studies within breeds that would be less expensive than trying to do it in an animal that wasn't from a breed, leveraging that lack of diversity. And that was how we found some of the initial genes like coat color and stuff. And so for scientists, they were like, dogs are an amazing model system because you have these breeds where they're all there's very little genetic diversity. And also because there's a lot of veterinary care in dogs. I mean, if you look at the sort of veterinary end of things, there is research in cats, but a lot of times a lot less than what has happened in dogs
Mhm.
historically. I think cats have been a little overlooked. And so that sort of bias in the veterinary world has sort of perpetuated in the genetics world. As sequencing DNA has gotten a lot of cheaper, the advantages of the breeds are much less than they used to be. And actually, it turns out there's a lot of drawbacks of the breeds that mean that there's things we can't do in dogs that we are going to be able to do in cats because they don't have that historic um, breed thing going on. Basically, in dogs, the breeds that are around today, the way these sort of like lack of diversity populations, they're only about 150 years old. The in England sort of invented the idea of a breed because they were really into genetic purity.
Mhm.
But today in Europe and the US, which are mostly all the dogs we study, all the dogs are pretty much either from a breed or they're a mix of breeds. Like that is sort of the population we look at.
Right.
Most of them are not what we call village dogs, which are the dogs that you could find in other countries. You find all over the world, which are just the dogs that live on the streets and on the garbage patches and are just like dogs.
Yeah.
Cats are pretty much nearly all like those dogs that are living in other countries, but we can actually study the ones in the US as well. And so
Yeah.
that's really exciting from a genetic standpoint because we don't have to worry about all the weirdness that happened in the 1800s, and we can actually look at the full history of cats by studying the ones that are around us today.
Right. So when you worked with dogs, you found that breed explained a lot of appearance, but less of behavior, which we, already touched on a little bit. Do you kind of expect the same for cats? Do you expect breed or ancestry to matter a lot for cat behavior?
I mean, it turns out that the first question we're going to have to answer in cats is what is a cat breed?
Yeah.
Because that's not actually very clear.
Yeah.
We took a look at the first set of cats that we sequenced. And for the most part, cats tend to be most closely related to cats that are born near them,
Hmm.
which is what you see in
Yeah.
humans. Obviously, humans move around the world, but if you looked at my DNA, you'd find out that I'm most closely related to people that come from, well, my father's Swedish, so a bunch of people who are in Sweden, right? And so mostly that's what we see in cats, that cats are mostly related to cats that live near where they are born. That's not true in dogs. If you sequenced a whole lot of dogs, you would find out that golden retrievers are all most closely related to all the other golden retrievers, no matter where in the country they come
Hmm.
from, because that's what a golden retriever is
Right.
from this population. So now we're looking at a lot more cats. We're hoping to sequence more cats that are from breeds, like defined cat breeds, to see whether there are breeds where they cluster like the dog breeds do, like the golden retrievers, or if cat breeds in general tend to be more genetically diverse than dog breeds, and maybe some of them are actually more what we would call, in a lot of cases, like a phenotypic designation, meaning that a lot of times a Siamese cat is a cat that looks Siamese as
Hmm.
opposed to its parents were Siamese, which is, in dogs, your parents have to be golden retrievers in order for you to be a
Right.
golden retriever. In cats, it might just be that cat looks like a Siamese and people call it a Siamese. And
Right.
so it's sort of it's a fascinating question to me as a geneticist. Like, how often is a cat breed like a dog breed, and how often is it actually something much more interesting? I like genetic diversity, so for me, like, the weirder it gets, the more interesting it
Yeah.
gets. So
Right. And the healthier the animal also.
I mean, I think that's a upside to the cats that I think we shouldn't overlook. I mean, there's a lot of data now in dogs that shows, dogs from breeds, dogs that are what they call purebred or single breed ancestry dogs, tend to live on average a year less than dogs that are mixed. And different breeds are prone to particular diseases at very high rates. And that's because when you lose genetic diversity, there's a risk of a lot of different diseases becoming more common. In cats, because there isn't that history of inbreeding to create these breeds,
Right.
you have these very diverse populations, and that is fantastic news for the cat's health.
I'm curious about the few cat breeds that there are, like looking at that versus just kind of our standard cat and seeing
Yeah,
like how the health questions would play out.
I think if we can come up with a way to define a cat breed, because right now we just sort of ask
Yeah.
people, is your cat from a breed? And
Right.
they're answering the question, but apparently that might be a more messy question than we realized it was. But if we can actually find some of the breeds that are more like dog breeds, we could start looking at questions like that. And we've
Yeah.
actually just added on our first, we're busy developing a series of surveys to ask about health questions, which, as you can imagine, is quite a challenging thing to develop because we need to walk that line between we asked the veterinarians and they gave us these extremely long and complicated questions, and then I sit there as a non-veterinarian going, I have no idea what you're asking me here, and as a cat owner, I don't know what the answer is. And so then we have to go back
Right.
and revise the question to be something that people could actually answer. But we now have our first health survey, I believe, live or about to go live on the site. And so we can actually collect that information in conjunction with the information on the cat's breed. And we might be able to get to the point where we can start asking these questions.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think it brings up another point I should make sure I emphasize, which is
Mhm.
one of the unusual things about our project, about Darwin's Ark, is it's what we call an open data project, meaning that we're not collecting this data just for us to do science on. We will share it with anybody else who's all the other scientists out there that are interested in studying cats.
Right.
One of the reasons why cat research has lagged behind is that it has been really challenging for the people that are working in that field to get the funding to do larger scale studies. And
Right.
so through Darwin's Ark and with the support of all the cat owners who actually donate for the sequencing, we can start to make the data sets much bigger, which means there's so many questions we could answer. And there's no way my research group could take on all of those questions. And so hopefully, as we build up the data set, other people are going to start doing this research as well, and then we can actually start doing all of these different questions and not just the things that my small group has the bandwidth for.
Yeah, that's so exciting. It's so exciting that like you've opened it up to other scientists. I think that's going to be
I love it. It's great for me. It's nothing more satisfying to me if that, and I actually like, because we have another large project that we called Zoonomia, which was across all the mammals. But I get so
Mhm.
excited when I go to meetings and people are like, "We used the Zoonomia data," and I'm like, "Yay!
Yeah, it's
Science is happening!"
it's so nice when people can use your data.
So a big focus of some of the other research in our group is looking at the early socialization because we think the timing of it differs between dogs and wolves. And so
Mm.
we think it's one of the things that sort of is the origins of domestication,
Yeah.
which is fascinating and involves video coding, which was my introduction to it. And oh my God, it's
Yeah.
time consuming and hard. It's just like,
It
it's so hard. I
is.
can't do it at all. I'm completely useless at it. I love Catherine's like, you can clearly see X. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Catherine, I can't see X at all. But I did, as a result, learn an awful lot about early socialization, which really fascinates me in the cats because I feel like there's so many people that get litters of kittens and then they're like in a room of their house and then they get really surprised that their cats are quite scared of things when they're adults. And I feel like in dogs, there's more of an acknowledgement that really at the very early ages need to be exposed to things that so
Yeah.
that they're not scared of them later in life. And in cats, there hasn't been as much of a recognition of that role of environment in behavior in some ways.
It's true, and I mean, you can teach adult cats to, not be afraid of the vacuum. You use DSCC to, to modify that, but it's true in kittens, it's so much easier, and with the kittens that we have right now who are right at that window, that's exactly what I'm doing, like, "Here's a vacuum, we're not afraid of it, like,
Yeah.
here's everything," so that Egg, our kitten, who's the one who just got spayed, she's not afraid of anything, like, you could literally vacuum her, and she'd be like, "Whatever," you know?
Yeah, no, so my cats have all come from well, one of them came from a program up at Canisius College where they clicker train kittens at the undergraduates clicker trained the kittens, and I know, it was so cool, and then the other 2 came from a foster home that had they were born there, and, like, there was a dog and other cats and a kid, and
Yeah.
my cats are like, somebody comes to the door and they're like, "Hey, a person! People are great. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
say hi to these people," right? So, anyway, sorry, I went off on a random tangent
No, no,
there.
no, so did
But it
I.
does tie into a question that was in your list of questions,
Yes.
which is looking at the genetics and the environment, so I've sort of got her anyway.
It's okay. So, I wanted to ask you also, like, are there any behaviors in cats that you are particularly eager to look at? I know that we talked a little bit about fetching, or are you looking at anything in particular that's, like, quirky or, like, everyday cat behaviors, or
You
what's
know, we
going on there?
try to capture a lot of different so we don't know how hard it's going to be to look at the genetics of traits in cats, really.
Mhm.
It's easier in dogs than it is in people, but that probably has something to do with them being breeds and mixes of breeds. And
Right.
so with cats, both confident that we're going to get some of it to work, but I'm also a little concerned about how many cats we're going to need to have signed up to have what we call statistical power because
Yeah.
they're so genetically complex. And the more genetically complex something is, the bigger the sample sizes are that you need to study it. And so anybody who's taking our surveys will notice that we have a very wide breadth of questions on there. And so we ask a lot of questions about coat color and striping and things
Mhm.
like that, patterning. And the reason that those are on there is partly so we can look at all those interesting questions about correlations between color and behavior, but also because often traits like patterning and coat color are genetically simpler, meaning that they're mostly genetic. The environment doesn't have a big effect, and often only a few changes in DNA are involved. So, an
Mhm.
example would be something like my cat Lacey is completely white, which means that she got this gene called dominant white. So, it's one
Mhm.
change in one gene, which means that her pigmentation doesn't show up and she's completely white. So, those are the kinds of traits we'll start with because we think they're going to be genetically simpler and we have what we would call positive controls, meaning that we can take the white cats and see if we can find the dominant white gene. And if we can, then we know we're on the right track. And so with the behaviors, we ask a very wide spectrum of different kinds of behaviors because we don't actually have a very good idea of which behaviors in cats are strongly genetically influenced and which
Mm.
behaviors are mostly environmental. And so
Right.
we wanted to ask a lot of different things to maximize our chances of having something in there that was very genetically influenced, which will be the things that we can more easily study
Right.
because our focus is on the genetics. For other people in the cat world, it may be that figuring out that a behavior is primarily environmental will actually be much more interesting to them because that means it's something you might be able to modify by doing things like changing early enrichment or behavior training later on. So that's sort of the way we've been thinking about it. Our guess is that, like in dogs, behaviors like, as I said, fetch. So it gets a little bit complicated here. There's some behavior science that Catherine's taught me that I'll try to summarize, which is so in dogs, there's this thing called the wolf predatory sequence, which in wolves is the series of behaviors or behavioral modules that they use to hunt.
Mhm.
And so, they'll orient towards something and then they do this eye stalk thing where they lower their head and they creep forward and then they chase and then they do grab bite and then they do kill bite, which is a
Mhm.
bleeding bite to the jugular. During dog domestication, dogs started using human garbage and waste as a food resource and they no longer needed to be able to hunt in order to survive. And so that whole predatory sequence sort of broke down.
Right.
And so now there's all these, in an evolutionary term, broken, but it turned out to be quite useful versions of predatory sequence that are actually we call retrieving and herding and livestock guarding and all those different the behaviors that show up in dogs. We were sort of thinking that in cats, because they're still mousers and things like that, that the predatory sequence would be mostly conserved between the old, the non-domestic, pre-domestic cat and modern cats.
Hmm.
But the fact that we're seeing things like fetch in a lot of cats might suggest that there's actually a lot more variation in predatory behavior in cats than what we were anticipating.
Right.
And if that's true, and it's true that, like in dogs, they're very genetically influenced. And to back up slightly, the reason they'd be so genetically influenced is that in wolves, it has to be genetics because you can't be a wolf and not hunt, right? Like there's evolution can't mess around with that. You can get to be a better hunter based on what your parents teach you, but there's got to be genetics behind that. And so we think there might actually be a lot of variation in cats within this predatory sequence, which would be both quite interesting just on its own, but might also mean that those kinds of behaviors are going to be the most tractable to the genetic studies.
Hmm.
That was a long answer, but I'm quite intrigued by this because it wasn't exactly what I was expecting, and so it's going to be. As a scientist, I love anything where it's like I get surprised by things. So
Right. I'm also just personally really would be curious to see the age range of fetching cats in your study. Because just anecdotally, I've noticed that it tends to fade. Like, it starts, obviously, in kittenhood, and then it tends to fade through young adulthood. So, I'm wondering how much of it is part the of play and
yeah, that would
predatory rehearsal that then
yeah, that's
fades as the cat ages and would turn into more traditional just hunting.
That's a great point. I mean, you know this already, obviously, but what I learned from Catherine was that when puppies play, they're basically sort of randomly doing all the different pieces of the predatory sequence. You'll
Right.
see them orient and then grab, bite, and then chase, and then orient again, and it's all random. And then over time, they sort of put it into the right sequence and get better at it. And so
Right.
you're right, that may also be what we're seeing in cats. And so that would be, we do actually, to your point, ask everybody when their cat was born. We had to think a lot about how to ask that question because some people do know the exact date on
Right.
which their cats were born and some people don't. And we always encourage people to make their best guess. Like we always know that people aren't going to know a lot of things perfectly, but a little bit of information is better than no information. And so
Sure.
then we can start. And so then when somebody answers a survey question about their cats, we take note of how old the cat was when they answered that question. And so then we can go back and look at the questions like what you're asking.
So, can you tell us like any findings or early observations that you found so far from Darwin's cats or, even if it's preliminary, any patterns that you're seeing?
Not really, and it's not because I'm hiding anything
Yeah, no.
from you, it's because we've been so stuck in the, like, actually getting this thing off the
Like,
ground that
sure.
it's getting slightly frustrating for us scientists where we're like, "We really want to go look at all this data,
Yeah,
but we need to get the health survey going."
I get it.
So, yeah, so we don't have a ton yet. I would love to be able to answer that question. And we did a few analyses just because we needed things to talk about. And this is going to be absolutely no shock to you or the audience of this podcast, but we have a question about how affectionate your cat is.
Mm,
And we ask a lot of the same questions for dogs and cats so that we can compare them and, showed that based on our survey data, cats are no less affectionate or into you than dogs are,
sure.
which is apparently very surprising to the audiences that I talk to often and absolutely not surprising to me as a cat owner at all. So, it's kind of like, so we've done a few things like that, but we haven't done the whole. Oh, and I do think Kasha took a look at the ginger question and she's not
Mm,
seeing anything different about the ginger cats yet, but we need to do a much more rigorous analysis before we can say that for sure.
of course. Ugh, I
Sorry,
can't.
Kasha Brick is the chief scientist on the project. I should have
Okay.
introduced her earlier. She's amazing.
I can't wait until you come out with that orange cat information because that's going to really help, hopefully, shut some
Yes.
people up about
You
things.
know, in the dog behavior paper we had, we one of the behavioral factors that came up in our survey data was something that we called agonistic threshold,
Hmm.
which encompassed a lot of questions related to aggression. And, we just named them like factor 5 or something to begin with and
Right.
had no idea what was in it. But it turned out that particular behavior factor was both the least heritable, meaning it was the most environmentally influenced factor that we looked at, and also the least different between the breeds of all the factors we looked at. And so basically, we couldn't see any evidence in our data that this agonistic threshold, the likelihood that a dog is going to react aggressively when something surprising happens, had a strong genetic component, let alone that it was, you could determine it based on a dog's breed. And it is a really great opportunity as a scientist to be able to put data behind something that a lot of other people need to talk to other, like I'm not going to be
Right.
the person that goes out and does the advocacy for things. That's not my role in this, but I can put together a really large data set, do a really rigorous statistical analysis, and get that data and those results out there for the people that are doing that work, which for me is really satisfying.
Absolutely. I would love to ask you a bunch of nerdy questions about all of your statistical analyses and your models, but I'm not gonna do that because I don't think anyone else wants to hear about that, so I won't get
Yeah,
into that.
no, I will mention, I don't think I've actually mentioned this yet. We're very excited about this. So, in order to sequence your cat's genetics. So, basically, to step back slightly,
Yeah.
we have all of our surveys that we ask everybody about their cat. And if people are interested, they can donate to do the genetics part of the project. And that's where we send you a kit to collect a DNA sample. And in this case, we've actually developed a brand new process that we're incredibly excited about that involves sending you a comb in a tube. With dogs, we do saliva swabs, and people could saliva swab their cats. As somebody who has cats, I figured it could potentially be quite dangerous for the person doing the swabbing,
Yes.
but also very unpleasant for my cats. And, we're not a project that, we're doing really interesting science that will benefit cats in the long term, but nothing where we actually want to harm the animals that are actually
Right.
participating, right? And so I was talking to a friend that does ancient DNA, and she's like, there's a lot of DNA in fur. And I was like, really? And so it turns out, and we've tested this now, the first 200 cats we tried, all 200 worked. And so we just send out a tube with a comb, and there's really we send out instructions, but there's really only one thing anybody's going to do with a comb. And so they
Yeah.
comb their cat and put it back in the tube and send it back to us. And it's like, I'm going to tell you that my cats actually quite enjoyed the combing process. Of course, then Lacey got very excited and tried to attack the comb, but that's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
different issue. So yeah, and if we do that, then we look at the DNA of your cat, and everybody's like, "What am I going to find out?" And I'm like, "Okay, so honestly, very short term, nothing, because we don't actually know enough about the genetics of cats to tell you anything yet. But we need the data now in order to develop the science, and as the science develops, we will update your cat's profile on our website with anything we're learning. So that information about which, can we tell where your cat comes from, like where are the cats that are most related to them, all that kind of stuff. So up until, normally the price for that sequencing is $150, and that's done at cost. We don't make any money off of it,
Mhm.
but we can't support the sequencing ourselves. And so this is a way of growing the data set without having the funding to do all the sequencing ourselves. However, right now, the company that we partnered with on this has actually given us funding so that they can pay for $100 of that 150.
Oh, that's
And so
great.
until the end of the year, you can actually do sequence your cat for only $50, which is really exciting for us because we know that that the actual donation cost is a barrier for a lot of people to participate. We have
Right.
absolutely amazing people that have filled out every single survey on our website and haven't been able to do the sequencing. And that's really frustrating to me because those are our most valuable participants, the ones that are able
Right.
to do all the surveys. And so we got the cost down to $50 until the end of the year, and I can give you the code that you need to use in order to do that.
Please.
Thinking of your 18 cats too, because the other thing we do with our surveys that I'm quite proud of is that when you fill out our survey questions, we actually have a little tag so that we can insert the name of your pet into the survey question,
Cute.
which is both personalizes it a bit, and if you have a lot of pets, it reminds you of which one you're actually answering the question for.
Yes. That is true. Yeah, I
And I
mean,
think with cat owners, we have a lot more participants in our cat project that have multiple cats enrolled than when we look on the dog side of things. So it's ended up being even more important.
that makes sense. I'm not sure that we'll be able to do all 18, but we can do some for
That
sure.
would be an awful lot.
It would be a lot.
It
That
would be
would
so
require a
much.
grant, some
Yeah,
type
I
of a
would just
grant.
pick a few that you know better, or
I
Right now, we're actually particularly interested in cats that have some of the common diseases that cats
Mhm.
get, like heart disease and kidney disease and things like that. We've been talking a lot with people about what we could learn from the genetics,
Right.
and what the time frame would be for doing that. And I realized that one of the big questions with cat diseases that isn't actually answered yet is how much genetics contributes to them for the most part. Like if you talk to any veterinarian because your cat gets kidney disease and ask them, is this because of something in their DNA or did it just happen because of the
Right.
environment? They can't answer that question at this point in time because that data doesn't exist anywhere. And so we're hoping that if we can get genetic information on cats that have some of these diseases, we need both ones that have it and the ones that don't. But we, have a lot of cats enrolled, and so in particular, it would be great to get the ones that actually have some of these diseases. We might be able to at least get that measurement of how much is genetics contributing to a cat's risk of getting the disease.
Right. All right. Well, that's important for our listeners to know. We are lucky enough that none of our cats have, I think,
Woohoo!
any of
Wow.
that stuff. Well, we have a cat who has FIV, but we know how he got that because he was a street cat. He was out fighting. I don't think that he was an IV drug user, and I guess he could have loved a woman who wasn't clean, but I sort of doubt that that was that was the case. I think he was just out scrapping.
Yeah, that would make
And
more sense.
yeah, and yeah, that's really it. My best friend, like soulmate cat, who's back in this picture with me up here. He passed 2 years ago from squamous cell carcinoma, and that is something that I would have been very interested to know if there was a genetic component to that, or like why all of a sudden that just showed up and took him so quickly. But other than that, like we've got a really healthy household. Even the cats who are like 15 doing
Wow.
great. You'd never know.
Yeah, no, I'm quite curious because I have a cat, my cat Lacey, who's absolutely fantastic in every way, except for the fact that she has terrible environmental allergies. She's allergic to everything. And she had a brother who actually died very young. He got a disease when he was 11 months old called pure red cell aplasia, which is an autoimmune disease
Yes.
where your immune system kills off your red blood cells, and we couldn't get it under control. And so I'm quite curious to know whether the fact that she has an immune disease, not an immune disease, but allergies or your immune
Right.
system responding inappropriately to things in the environment, whether that's just a random thing or if that's related to why, like maybe there was a propensity there and her brother just happened to be at higher risk, or, in him it was a severe disease and in her it's a mild disease. I will never enter this particular question, but it has got me thinking a lot more about immune diseases in general in cats because if you talk to people, as I said, I've asked my cat's dermatologist about this and they're like, could be, we don't know. So it's just a lot of unknowns out there.
Her allergies, do they present as dermatitis or how
Yeah,
are they? Okay.
she's a white cat and she gets these like bleeding sores, so it's like really obvious.
It's so interesting. I mean, again, this is just anecdote, as humans, we love to just like make these little, right? But our three oldest cats are all related and they're brother and sisters, and they're also all white cats that I rescued during Hurricane Sandy, and they all have that same thing. They all are
Yeah,
very
and
allergic, and they will get those same spots, and then one of them is constant. They're kind of asthmatic, and it's just allergies to the environment.
yeah, no, and when I was talking to the dermatologist a couple weeks ago, she actually said the same thing. She's like, I feel like white cats might be more prone to things, but
Yeah,
it's hard to, and so that's where, I think what you're saying is actually a really nice illustration of the power of this community science approach because there's a lot of things that the pet owners observe. And we can chat about it individually, and we're always going to be saying, well, but it was only a few cats.
right.
Maybe I was just biased in what I was seeing, that kind of thing. But if we can get enough people to answer the questions, then we can start to untangle this. And so the anecdotes are actually quite helpful because now we can sort of go in and say, one of the questions that we should ask is, are we seeing a higher rate of people reporting skin problems in cats? And does that vary based on the cat's color? Because it's something, there's a lot of different questions we could ask. And in a way, it can be sort of motivating behind the analysis. I have no idea what we're going to find. As you said, people are really good at seeing patterns. And I'm sure, I mean, I know that's true of me as well. And so I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that it's just you notice the white cats more because you can see the skin issues, or because it's kind of unusual to see a white cat or whatever it is. But we'll be able to actually test that now,
Right.
which is really exciting for me.
White cats genetically a little strange, like, they're genetically a little bit less diverse, or something's, like, strange
Well,
with,
I
like,
will
an
say that
all-white animal.
I will say that my cat is a little
Well,
strange,
yeah.
but no, I don't know that it's because of her color. I was actually thinking about this the other day, but I went and looked at some videos I had of Lacey's litter, and it turns out that she and her brother were I think the only white cats in that whole litter. And so it really is something that there shouldn't be any difference in the overall diversity because, like all the
Yeah,
other cats aren't white at all. So I don't think it's that. Although it did lead me on to the interesting idea that as we look at all the pigmentation traits and figure out the genetics of the pigmentation stuff, I'm actually going to be able to figure out what color Lacey would have been if she hadn't got that thing to make her white.
oh,
Which is really stupid thing to want to know, but I'm kind of fascinated
yeah,
by it. Like,
why not?
what would she have looked at if she had looked
Yeah.
like if she hadn't gotten that one extra genetic change that turned her completely white?
I mean, listen, whatever makes you happy, you know? I
It's
think that's
yes.
interesting. I think all of this is interesting. So oh, sorry, go ahead.
I know. I was going to say. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's the most fun about this project, and working with all of the people that are really excited about it as part of that is that it's a way to do science. It's both really, really high quality science, but it's also science outreach. Like, we
Right.
can't do this research unless the pet owners are our partners in it, unless they're engaged in telling us what they know, especially given that there's a lot of science, that right now in our country, there's a lot of stuff on the science end of things that's really challenging and really stressful.
Yeah,
It's really nice to have a project that's doing exciting science that people are excited about and that is really engaging people in the whole process of how we do research.
absolutely. So to that end, how can our listeners get involved? How can we recruit some people for you? What do they do?
So it's Yeah, so it's very easy to sign up. You go to darwinsark.org and you can set up an account and add your cats to it. You can also add your dogs to it if you happen to have a dog. Some of us actually do have both cats and dogs. We also do sequencing of dogs. It's on pause right now because we had a whole vendor switch thing going on and we're trying to develop our new process and all that fun that happens behind the scenes. But we're working very hard to have it up and running in the near future. And so you sign up your cats, you answer our survey questions, hopefully. I'm just going to keep all my fingers crossed. And if you're interested in doing your cat's genetics, then you can you can basically do the donation and use the code to get the $50 until the end of the year. But you can do the donation and actually we'll send you the kit to collect the fur sample from your cat. Everybody's like, I've got cat fur everywhere. I could go pick it
Mhm.
off the couch. Don't do that. We
Yeah,
send
no.
you a comb for a reason. We're always worried that there's going to be samples that are mixes of different cats and things like that. So just we send you the comb your cat, send it back to us.
You don't want people to just get a big fur clump from the corner
No,
and
that's
roll it
really
up
not
and
helpful for us at all. And then I think I was actually asking Jill about it this morning, and I think that we've probably, what was the numbers? I think that we've sequenced about 450 cats so far. Oh, no, we
wow.
sequenced about 800 so far, and we've got another 400 in the pipeline. So it's actually going really well, and we're
Yeah.
hoping that it's going to keep getting bigger. The more data we have, the more cats that are signed up, the more things we can find. Everybody's always asking me, so how many cats do you want? And I'm like, well, honestly, I'd love to have all of them. Probably not going to happen anytime soon, but genetics is, especially for traits that have an environmental and a genetic component, it can get really hard to untangle those two things and actually
Right.
find the genetic changes that influence the traits. And so the more cats that are enrolled and the more that we know about them, the more power we have to do that science. And this really is a long term sort of project. This isn't something that's going to wrap up in a year. We're trying to build a data resource that will help, whether it's my group or all the other people out there that are interested in studying cats. It's actually going to keep cat science moving forward for a long time to come.
I'm so excited for this project. And for our listeners, the code, if you want to get involved and you want to send in your cat's fur, the code for that $50 price is hiss and. So it's the and is the ampersand. So it's hiss ampersand tell 25. So use that code to get your $50 price through the end of the year. And then you can just go to darwinsark.org and get started. And I really want to thank you for coming on the podcast. This was so interesting. And I think all of our listeners are going to also be so excited. And hopefully they're all going to get involved and send in their cats for samples and follow along to look at all of your research.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about cats. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review wherever you listen. It super helps. For more information and to support our podcast, check out our website at hisandtellpodcast.com. You can also find us on Instagram at hisandtellpodcast. Music provided by Cat Beats.